The night the most feared man in Seattle walked into that restaurant, nobody noticed the waitress crying behind the coffee machine. Rain slammed against the windows of Harbor Lights Diner, while Emily Carter wiped spilled beer from table 7 for the third time that hour. Her white uniform already carried stains from tomato sauce, coffee, and the red wine a customer had thrown at her 20 minutes earlier after complaining that his fries were cold. Nobody apologized to her in that place. Nobody ever did. At 24 years old, Emily had learned that people rarely looked twice at a poor waitress with tired eyes and old sneakers. The diner sat near the industrial docks south of Seattle, surrounded by warehouses, neon liquor signs, and broken pavement that stayed wet almost year-round. Truck drivers came for cheap burgers. Late-night gamblers came for whiskey. Men hiding from something came for the shadows. Emily quietly survived all of them. "Move faster, Emily," her manager Rick snapped while counting receipts near the register. "Table 4 has been waiting 5 minutes." Emily nodded without arguing. She always nodded. Rent was due in 3 days, and she could not afford another warning. She grabbed a fresh pot of coffee and walked carefully between crowded tables while an old country song played softly from a dusty speaker above the kitchen door. Near midnight, the front door opened, and cold air swept through the diner. Everything changed in less than 3 seconds. Conversation stopped. A waitress near the counter accidentally dropped a glass. Even Rick straightened his posture immediately. 4 men entered first, all wearing dark suits despite the storm outside. They scanned the restaurant silently before stepping aside. Then the 5th man walked in. Vincent Kuragawa did not need an introduction. Emily recognized him instantly even though she had only seen him before in whispered local news stories and blurry internet photos. Tall, calm, perfectly controlled, Vincent moved through the diner with the kind of silence that forced everyone else to become quiet too. Rumors around Seattle described him as a businessman, but nobody believed that story. People said judges feared him. People said gangs disappeared after crossing him. One thing everybody agreed on was simple. You did not look Vincent Kuragawa directly in the eyes unless you wanted trouble. Rick hurried forward nervously. "Mr. Kuragawa, welcome back. Your usual booth is ready." Vincent gave a small nod and walked toward the rear corner booth near the rain-covered windows. His bodyguards followed without speaking. Every waitress suddenly found reasons to stay away from that section. Every waitress except Emily. "Go take their order," Rick whispered harshly. "Now." Emily looked down at the wine stain across her uniform and quietly picked up a menu. Her heartbeat felt heavier with every step toward the booth. Vincent sat calmly while removing black leather gloves from his hands. That was when Emily saw it. A dark symbol marked the inside of his wrist. The moment her eyes landed on the tattoo, the color drained from her face. She had seen that exact symbol before. 15 years earlier. The night her father disappeared in Tokyo. Emily almost dropped the coffee pot when she saw the symbol on Vincent Kuragawa's wrist. For a brief second, the noisy diner around her disappeared beneath the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Her father had drawn that same mark dozens of times in an old notebook back in Tokyo when she was a little girl. He used to tell her never to repeat it, never to ask questions about it, and never to trust anyone connected to it. Then one night he vanished without explanation, leaving behind only unpaid bills, an empty apartment, and a frightened 9-year-old girl holding a notebook full of strange symbols she never understood. "Miss?" one of Vincent's bodyguards said sharply. Emily realized she had been staring too long. She quickly lowered her eyes and forced herself to breathe normally. "Sorry," she whispered. "What can I get for you tonight?" Vincent studied her silently before speaking. "Black coffee." His voice was calm, almost quiet, but every word carried weight. The others ordered whiskey and steak without even looking at the menu. Emily wrote everything down carefully while trying not to show how badly her hands trembled. As she turned to leave, she heard Vincent speak in Japanese. "The meeting should not have been moved." Emily froze for half a second. None of the other customers reacted. Nobody else in the diner understood the language. One of the men sitting beside Vincent answered in a lower voice. We received information 30 minutes ago. Someone inside the organization leaked your location. Emily kept walking toward the kitchen, but every nerve in her body tightened. Her father had forced her to learn Japanese formally as a child. Even after moving to America, she never forgot it. Behind the kitchen counter, she poured coffee into ceramic mugs while pretending not to listen, but Vincent's table sat close enough for certain words to reach her through the diner noise. If the traitor is correct, another man whispered in Japanese, they may attempt something tonight. Emily slowly looked toward the rain-covered windows. A black SUV sat parked across the street with its headlights off. At first glance it looked ordinary, but something about it felt wrong. The engine was still running. Her chest tightened. She carried the drinks back toward the booth carefully. Rick suddenly stepped beside her and forced an ugly smile. Do not mess this up, he muttered quietly. Those men spend more money in one night than you make in 3 months. Emily ignored him and placed the drinks down one by one. Vincent thanked her with a small nod. Then one of the younger bodyguards laughed while looking at her stained uniform. This place hires interesting people. Another man smirked. She looks terrified. Emily said nothing. She simply reached for the coffee pot again. Then Vincent spoke in Japanese without taking his eyes off his glass. The girl is not afraid. The table fell silent. Emily felt her pulse stumble. Vincent slowly raised his eyes toward her for the first time since she approached the booth. Most people avoid looking at me, he continued in Japanese. But you noticed the tattoo immediately. Emily's throat tightened. One dangerous truth suddenly became clear. Vincent Kuragawa knew she understood every word. Emily felt every eye at the table shift toward her after. Vincent Kuragawa exposed the truth without raising his voice even once. The sound of silverware and quiet conversations returned throughout the diner, but inside the booth near the rain-covered windows, the atmosphere had completely changed. Emily tightened her grip on the coffee pot and forced herself to stay calm. I do not know what you are talking about, she answered carefully in English. One of the bodyguards leaned forward immediately. Boss, should we? Vincent raised one hand slightly, and the man stopped talking at once. Emily noticed that nobody interrupted Vincent. Nobody questioned him twice. Even silence obeyed him. Vincent continued speaking in Japanese, his dark eyes fixed calmly on her face. Your accent sounds natural. Tokyo? Emily hesitated for only a second before quietly answering in the same language. I lived there until I was 9. The reaction around the table was instant. One man nearly dropped his whiskey glass. Another exchanged a suspicious glance with the bodyguard beside him. Rick stared from behind the counter in complete confusion, unable to understand a single word but clearly aware something unusual was happening. Vincent studied her more carefully now. Most Americans who learn Japanese do not sound like that, he said. Emily placed the coffee pot down slowly. My father was Japanese. She regretted saying the words immediately. Talking about her father always opened wounds she spent years trying to bury beneath long work shifts and unpaid bills. Vincent noticed the change in her expression. Was? Emily looked away toward the rain outside. He disappeared a long time ago. For the first time since entering the diner, Vincent's expression shifted slightly. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Emily noticed it. Recognition. Before she could think further, one of the younger men at the table spoke urgently in Japanese. Boss, we should leave. Staying here is dangerous. Vincent ignored him. What is your name? He asked Emily quietly. Emily Carter. Vincent repeated the name slowly, as if testing whether he recognized it. Then he glanced again toward the diner windows. Emily followed his gaze automatically. The black SUV across the street had not moved. Its headlights remained off, but now she noticed something else. The driver inside was watching the diner directly. Her stomach tightened. Someone has been sitting in that vehicle for at least 20 minutes, she said carefully in Japanese. One of the bodyguards immediately turned toward the window. You noticed that? Emily nodded. I notice people. It is part of this job. Vincent remained calm, but the atmosphere at the table sharpened instantly. The men beside him quietly adjusted their jackets and scanned the street outside. Emily suddenly realized she had crossed into something dangerous without meaning to. She should have stayed quiet. She should have walked away. Instead, she lowered her voice and made the mistake that changed everything. The man inside the SUV used a radio twice. She whispered. And when your convoy arrived, he stopped pretending to drink his coffee. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. You saw all that while working? Emily looked down at her stained uniform. People ignore waitresses, she answered softly. That makes it easy to see things nobody else notices. For several long seconds, Vincent said nothing at all. Then, somewhere outside beyond the rain and neon lights, headlights suddenly turned on across the street. The moment the headlights flashed across the diner windows, Vincent Kuragawa stood up without urgency, but every man at the table reacted immediately. 2 bodyguards moved closer to the entrance while another quietly reached beneath his jacket. Customers throughout the diner sensed something was wrong even if they did not understand why. Conversations faded again. Forks stopped moving. Rain continued crashing against the glass while the black SUV across the street slowly pulled away from the curb. Emily watched it disappear through the storm with a strange feeling settling deep in her chest. Whoever had been inside that vehicle was not there by accident. Vincent looked toward Emily once more. You pay attention unusually well, he said in Japanese. Emily folded her arms slightly, suddenly aware of the wine stain drying across her white uniform. When people spend years pretending you do not exist, you learn to observe quietly. One of Vincent's men glanced at her suspiciously. Boss, we should not stay here discussing this. Vincent ignored him again. Where did your father work in Tokyo? Emily hesitated. Memories she had avoided for years began returning too clearly. A small apartment near Shinjuku. Medical books stacked across the kitchen table. Her father constantly checking the locks at night. Strange men visiting their apartment after midnight, while Emily pretended to sleep. He was a doctor, she answered carefully. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. Name? Emily looked directly at him for the first time since the conversation began. Kenji Sato. The reaction at the table was immediate. One bodyguard cursed quietly under his breath. Another looked genuinely stunned. Even Vincent became completely still. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. You knew him, she whispered. Vincent said nothing for several seconds. Then he slowly sat back down. Kenji Sato saved my father's life 20 years ago. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Her father had never mentioned the Kuragawa name once during her childhood. That is impossible, she said quietly. Vincent reached for his untouched coffee. Your father disappeared shortly after refusing to cooperate with certain people in Tokyo. Emily felt cold despite the warmth of the diner. What people? Vincent looked toward the rain-covered windows again before answering carefully. The kind of people who do not appreciate honesty. Emily suddenly remembered the night her father vanished. She had woken up around 2 in the morning after hearing voices near the apartment door. Her father had rushed into her room, packed a small suitcase, and told her they were leaving Japan soon. But before sunrise he was gone. She never saw him again. Her mother changed their last name after moving to America and refused to discuss Tokyo afterward. My mother always said he abandoned us, Emily whispered. Vincent's voice remained calm. Your father did many things. Abandoning his family does not sound like one of them. Emily looked down at the floor, struggling to process the words. For years she carried anger toward a man she believed had walked away from her life willingly. Now that certainty suddenly felt unstable. Rick approached the booth nervously with forced confidence. Is everything all right over here? Vincent slowly lifted his eyes toward him. Rick instantly lost his smile. Yes, sir. Sorry to interrupt. He quickly walked away again without another word. Emily noticed several customers staring toward her now. Not with disrespect anymore, but curiosity. Fear even. They saw her speaking privately with the most dangerous man in the city as if she belonged there. Vincent stood once more and reached into his coat pocket. He placed a black business card beside the coffee cup. No logo. No address. Only a phone number embossed in silver. "If anyone asks questions about tonight," he said quietly, "call me immediately." Emily stared at the card without touching it. "Why would you help me?" Vincent studied her silently before answering. "Because your father once saved someone important to me. And because tonight you may have saved me." Emily did not touch the black business card for nearly 10 seconds after Vincent Kuragawa and his men finally left the diner. The sound of the storm outside returned slowly, followed by nervous conversations spreading across the restaurant like whispers after an earthquake. Customers who had ignored her all night were suddenly watching her from every table. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. Emily carefully picked up the card and slipped it into her apron pocket just before Rick hurried toward her. "What exactly was that?" he demanded quietly. Emily grabbed empty glasses from Vincent's table without looking at him. "I served coffee." Rick lowered his voice further. "Do not play dumb with me. That man does not sit around talking to waitresses for fun." Emily stayed silent. She already regretted becoming involved at all. Rick crossed his arms. "You know who he is, right?" Before Emily could answer, the diner entrance opened again. 3 young men in expensive jackets walked inside laughing loudly. The smell of alcohol followed them through the door. Emily recognized them immediately. They worked at a luxury car dealership nearby and came into Harbor Lights almost every Friday night. They tipped badly and enjoyed embarrassing employees whenever possible. One of them spotted Emily instantly. "Well, look who suddenly has important friends," he joked loudly while sliding into a booth near the counter. His friends laughed. Emily walked toward them professionally with a notepad in her hand. "What can I get started for you tonight?" The tallest man smirked while looking at the stain on her uniform. "Maybe somebody should buy you a new shirt." Another laughed. "Careful, Tyler. Her rich boyfriend might hear you." Rick pretended not to notice while counting receipts behind the register. Emily forced a polite smile she no longer felt. "Would you like to order?" Tyler leaned back against the booth. "Tell me something first. Did that guy leave you a huge tip, or was he recruiting?" His friends laughed harder. Normally, Emily ignored comments like that. She survived by staying invisible. But tonight felt different. The memory of Vincent calmly defending her at the table still lingered in her mind. For the first time in years, she felt tired of allowing strangers to humiliate her simply because they could. "Coffee or burgers?" she asked calmly. Tyler's smile faded slightly. "Wow. Somebody found confidence tonight." Before Emily could answer, headlights suddenly swept across the diner windows again. A black luxury sedan stopped directly outside the entrance. The laughter inside the booth disappeared immediately. The front passenger door opened first. One of Vincent's bodyguards stepped out into the rain carrying a dark umbrella. Then Vincent himself emerged from the back seat. The entire diner froze again. Tyler looked toward the windows, confused. "No way," one of his friends whispered. Vincent entered the diner calmly while rainwater dripped from his coat sleeves. His eyes moved across the room once before landing directly on Emily. He walked toward the counter without acknowledging anyone else. Rick instantly straightened his posture again. "Mr. Kuragawa, welcome back." Vincent ignored him completely. Emily felt every customer staring at her as Vincent stopped only a few feet away. "You forgot this," he said quietly before placing a small leather notebook onto the counter. Emily's heart nearly stopped. She recognized it instantly. Her father's notebook. The same black notebook filled with Japanese writing and strange symbols she had not seen since childhood. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the worn cover. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. Vincent studied her carefully before answering. "Your father gave it to someone for safekeeping many years ago." Tyler and his friends sat completely silent now. Nobody in the diner laughed anymore. Vincent glanced once toward the young men who had mocked Emily moments earlier. They immediately looked away. Then Vincent turned back toward her. "Miss Carter," he said calmly enough for the entire diner to hear, "I believe your father wanted you to have it back." Emily barely slept after her shift ended. By the time she finally returned to her tiny apartment near the Seattle waterfront, the rain had slowed into a cold mist drifting past the streetlights outside her window. She placed her keys on the kitchen counter and stared at the black leather notebook resting in her hands. For years she believed everything connected to her father had disappeared forever. Yet somehow Vincent Kuragawa had returned a piece of her childhood that even her mother claimed no longer existed. Emily sat carefully at the small kitchen table and opened the notebook for the first time in nearly 15 years. The pages smelled faintly of old paper and cigarette smoke. Most of the writing was in Japanese. Some pages contained medical notes. Others held strange symbols, dates, and names she did not recognize. Then she found something that made her stop breathing for a moment. Her own name. Written by her father in careful handwriting across the top corner of one page. Beneath it, a sentence in Japanese read, "If Emily ever receives this notebook, it means I failed to keep her away from them." Emily slowly leaned back in her chair, her chest tightening. Them. The same vague warning her father used before disappearing. Her phone suddenly vibrated against the table, nearly making her jump. Unknown number. Emily hesitated before answering. Quietly. "Hello? You should not stay alone tonight." Vincent's calm voice filled the line immediately. Emily sat upright. "How did you get this number?" "It was attached to your employee file at the diner." Emily almost laughed in disbelief. "That sounds extremely illegal." Vincent ignored the comment. "Did you read the notebook?" Emily looked down at the open pages. "A little." "Then you understand why I called." Emily walked slowly toward her apartment window. Outside, the narrow street below looked empty except for a parked delivery truck and flickering neon signs from a liquor store across the block. "You still have not explained why my father trusted you," she said quietly. There was a brief silence before Vincent answered. "Your father did not trust me. He trusted my father." Emily frowned slightly. "That does not explain anything." "No," Vincent admitted calmly. "It does not." Emily leaned against the window frame. "Then explain this instead. Why would someone like my father become involved with people like you?" Vincent's voice lowered slightly. "Because your father believed he could save dangerous men from destroying themselves." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. That sounded exactly like him. Even as a child, she remembered her father treating strangers for free and helping people everyone else avoided. "There are names inside that notebook," Vincent continued. "If the wrong people realize you have it, your life becomes complicated very quickly." Emily looked again at the pages filled with symbols and notes. She barely understood. "You think someone is watching me?" "I know they are." The words settled heavily inside the quiet apartment. Emily suddenly remembered the black SUV outside the diner, and the strange feeling of being observed all night. "What exactly is inside this notebook?" she whispered. "Information your father spent years hiding." Emily heard soft traffic sounds through Vincent's phone before he spoke again. "Look outside your building." Her stomach tightened instantly. Emily slowly moved the curtain aside. A black sedan sat parked across the street beneath a broken street lamp. Two men remained inside the vehicle with the engine running. The moment Emily saw them, one of the men looked directly toward her apartment window. Her pulse jumped. "Who are they?" she whispered. Vincent answered without emotion. "People who should not know your name yet." Emily stepped backward from the window immediately. "What am I supposed to do?" For the first time since meeting him, Vincent's voice softened slightly. "Do not panic, Emily. My driver is already on the way to you." Emily stood frozen beside the apartment window long after Vincent ended the call. Across the street, the black sedan remained parked beneath the broken street lamp exactly where it had been before. The men inside no longer tried to hide the fact that they were watching her building. One of them smoked quietly while staring toward her window through the rain-covered glass. Emily quickly stepped away from the curtain and pressed both hands against the kitchen counter, trying to calm her breathing. 24 hours earlier, her biggest problem had been overdue rent and rude customers at Harbor Lights Diner. Now dangerous strangers sat outside her apartment because of a notebook left behind by the father she had not seen since childhood. A pair of headlights suddenly turned into the narrow street below. A black town car stopped directly in front of Emily's building. The sedan across the street immediately pulled away and disappeared into the night without using its headlights for several seconds. Emily noticed that detail instantly. They were afraid of whoever had just arrived. Her phone vibrated again. Vincent. "The driver is downstairs," he said calmly. "Bring the notebook and only essentials." Emily frowned. "You expect me to leave with a stranger in the middle of the night?" "No," Vincent answered quietly. "I expect you to survive the week." Emily looked around her tiny apartment. The old couch near the television. Bills stacked beside the microwave. A family photo turned face down inside a drawer because seeing it hurt too much. Nothing about the place suddenly felt safe anymore. "Where am I going?" she asked. "Somewhere private." Emily grabbed a small backpack and stuffed in a few clothes, her wallet, and the notebook. 5 minutes later she stepped outside into the cold Seattle air, pulling her jacket tighter against the wind. The driver waiting beside the town car wore a dark suit and white gloves despite the late hour. He opened the rear passenger door respectfully. "Miss Carter." Emily hesitated before getting inside. The car smelled faintly of leather and cedar. As they drove through downtown Seattle, Emily watched neon reflections slide across the rain-covered windows while anxiety twisted deeper inside her chest. She finally spoke after several minutes. "Does Vincent Kuragawa always send chauffeurs to rescue waitresses?" The driver almost smiled. "Only the important ones." Emily leaned back against the seat with frustration. "I am not important." The driver glanced at her briefly through the mirror. "Miss Carter, men have already started following you because of your father. That alone makes you important now." The city lights slowly faded behind them as the car climbed toward the quieter hills north of downtown. 20 minutes later they reached a massive modern estate overlooking the dark waters of Puget Sound. Security gates opened automatically before the vehicle continued along a curved private driveway lined with pine trees and soft ground lights. Emily stared at the enormous glass and stone mansion ahead in disbelief. "He lives here?" she whispered. The driver answered simply. "Mr. Kuragawa values privacy." Inside, the house felt almost unnaturally quiet. Soft jazz played somewhere distant while warm lighting reflected across polished wood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows. Emily suddenly became painfully aware of her stained diner uniform and worn sneakers. A house employee politely offered tea while another took her wet jacket. Nobody looked surprised to see her there. That somehow made the entire situation even stranger. Then Vincent appeared at the top of the staircase wearing a dark sweater instead of the expensive coat from earlier. Without the restaurant crowd around him, he looked calmer. Less untouchable. But somehow more intimidating. Emily crossed her arms immediately. "You still have not told me why people are following me." Vincent walked down the stairs slowly before answering. "Because your father disappeared with something valuable." Emily tightened her grip on the notebook. "What exactly?" Vincent stopped only a few feet away from her. His expression remained controlled, but his eyes carried something heavier now. "Concern. Evidence," he said quietly. "Evidence that could destroy powerful people on both sides of the Pacific Ocean." Emily stared at Vincent Kuragawa across the quiet living room while rain rolled down the massive windows overlooking Puget Sound. The words he had spoken moments earlier echoed heavily inside her mind. Evidence. Powerful people. Both sides of the Pacific Ocean. None of it sounded connected to the father she remembered teaching her multiplication at the kitchen table and carrying groceries home through crowded Tokyo streets. "You are telling me my father was involved in something criminal?" she asked quietly. Vincent shook his head once. "No. I am telling you your father discovered something criminal." Emily looked down at the notebook in her hands again. Suddenly it felt heavier than before. Then why did he keep it? Vincent walked toward a small bar near the fireplace and poured himself a glass of water before answering. Because your father believed if the information disappeared, innocent people would suffer. Emily followed him with her eyes carefully. She still did not fully trust him, but the strange thing was that Vincent never spoke to her like she was foolish. Most people interrupted her before she even finished sentences. Vincent listened to every word as if it mattered. What kind of evidence are we talking about? She asked. Vincent remained silent for several seconds before answering carefully. Financial records. Medical reports. Names connected to illegal operations that stretched from Tokyo to Seattle. Emily frowned. Medical reports? Vincent nodded slowly. Your father worked as a private physician for people connected to organized crime. Eventually, he realized certain individuals were using medical clinics to move money and hide information. Emily sat down slowly on the edge of the leather sofa, trying to process everything. And because of that, people started hunting him? Vincent's expression darkened slightly. Your father refused to cooperate. That made him dangerous. The room felt quiet except for distant thunder outside. Emily looked again at the Japanese writing filling the notebook pages. If this information is so important, why did my father never give it to the police? Vincent gave a faint humorless smile. Because some of the people involved own the police. Emily leaned back against the sofa cushions and closed the notebook carefully. For years she thought her father abandoned her family. Now every memory felt unstable. My mother always seemed terrified after we came to America. She whispered. She changed our last name within months. Vincent looked toward the fireplace. She was trying to keep you alive. Emily swallowed hard. Nobody had ever said something like that to her before. Suddenly the years of secrecy around her childhood no longer felt random. Do you know what happened to him? She asked softly. Vincent met her eyes again. No. Emily immediately recognized the difference between uncertainty and dishonesty. Vincent was telling the truth. That somehow frightened her more. A house employee quietly entered carrying tea before quickly leaving again. Emily wrapped both hands around the warm cup without drinking. Why are you helping me? She asked again. Vincent sat across from her now, calmer than before. Because your father once protected my family when he had every reason not to. Emily looked at him carefully beneath the warm light of the room. For the first time since meeting him, Vincent no longer seemed like the terrifying man whispered about in Seattle rumors. He looked exhausted. Controlled, still dangerous, but tired in a way she understood deeply. You trusted him, she said quietly. Vincent lowered his eyes briefly toward the notebook in her lap. My father trusted him. He corrected softly. I was too young to understand what kind of man he really was until after he disappeared. Emily hesitated before speaking again. And what kind of man was he? Vincent answered without hesitation. The kind who sacrificed everything to protect people weaker than himself. Emily felt emotion tighten unexpectedly in her throat. Before she could respond, one of Vincent's bodyguards entered the room quickly. His expression had changed completely. Boss, he said urgently in Japanese. Someone accessed Harbor Light's security cameras less than an hour ago. Vincent immediately stood. Who? The bodyguard looked toward Emily briefly before answering. Whoever they are, they now know exactly who she is. The atmosphere inside Vincent Kuragawa's mansion changed instantly after the bodyguard delivered the news. The calm warmth of the living room disappeared beneath a colder tension Emily could physically feel. Vincent remained composed, but the silence around him became sharper. More dangerous. How much did they access? He asked in Japanese. Everything from the last 48 hours. The bodyguard answered. They specifically downloaded footage involving Miss Carter. Emily slowly stood from the sofa, tightening her grip on the notebook. So now whoever is looking for my father's information knows my face. Vincent nodded once. Yes. Emily let out a quiet breath and looked toward the dark windows overlooking Puget Sound. Somehow, despite the fear growing inside her, Another feeling had started replacing it. Anger. For years she worked exhausting shifts, ignored insults, survived loneliness, and blamed herself for a past she never understood. Now strangers were hunting her because her father tried to protect innocent people. "I am tired of running from things nobody will explain to me," she said quietly. Vincent studied her carefully. "Then stop running." Emily turned toward him. "What does that mean?" Vincent walked toward the fireplace slowly before answering. "Your father hid that notebook because he believed someday the truth inside it would matter more than his own safety." Emily looked down at the worn leather cover again. "I still do not even know what half these pages mean. But you can learn." Emily frowned slightly. "Why are you acting like this is my responsibility?" Vincent's answer came immediately. "Because it already became your responsibility the moment people started following you." The room fell silent again. Emily hated that he was probably right. One of the bodyguards quietly stepped closer to Vincent. "Boss, there is another issue." Vincent glanced toward him. "What?" "Word is spreading around the city." The bodyguard hesitated briefly before continuing. "People are talking about the waitress." Emily blinked in confusion. "What does that mean?" The bodyguard looked uncomfortable, answering her directly. "People noticed Mr. Kuragawa returning to Harbor Lights personally for you." Emily almost laughed from disbelief. "That is what everyone is focused on right now." Vincent's expression remained unreadable. "People fear what they do not understand." Emily crossed her arms. "Yesterday nobody in Seattle even knew my name." Vincent looked directly at her. "Yesterday you were invisible." The truth in those words hit harder than Emily expected. Invisible. That was exactly how life always felt. Customers ignored her unless something went wrong. Managers blamed her for problems she did not create. Men mocked her because they assumed a poor waitress could never matter. But tonight everything had changed. Suddenly dangerous people knew her face. Powerful men protected her. And for the first time in years, someone looked at her as if she mattered. Emily walked slowly toward the massive living room windows overlooking the dark water below the cliffs. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Vincent joined her near the glass. The reflection of Seattle lights shimmered across the bay beneath the storm clouds. "Now we find out what your father died trying to hide." Emily looked at him immediately. "You said you did not know if he was dead." Vincent remained silent for several seconds before answering softly. "Men like your father rarely disappear for 15 years without reason." Emily lowered her eyes. Deep down, she had always known that truth herself. Vincent's voice softened slightly. "But if he sacrificed his life protecting that information, then the people responsible should finally be exposed." Emily stared at the notebook in her hands one last time before slowly nodding. For the first time since her father vanished, she no longer felt like a helpless child abandoned in the dark. She felt connected to something larger than herself. Something dangerous. Something important. Behind them, one of Vincent's employees quietly entered the room. "Miss Carter," the woman said respectfully, "your room is ready." Emily turned slightly, surprised by the kindness in the woman's voice. Respect. It was such a small thing, yet it felt unfamiliar after years of being treated like she was worth nothing. Vincent glanced toward her calmly. "You are safe here tonight." Emily looked at him carefully beneath the soft light reflecting across the glass windows. The feared man everyone in Seattle avoided had given her protection when nobody else even noticed her existence. And somewhere far beyond the rain and city lights, the truth about her father was finally beginning to wake up.